I guess I want to talk just a little bit more about the sort of Canadian gun owner ethos. Do you think that it's closer to sort of the American ethos, which is obviously the United States has a fairly unique founding story where resisting gun confiscation is quite literally baked into our actual founding, history, because the redcoats that were coming, that Paul Revere warned about, they were going to Concord in order to seize arms and powder storage there, and that led to an armed standoff that started the Revolutionary War. That was where the shot heard around the world was fired, and that every American learns in elementary school. And so there's obviously a very strong inclination here in the United States to resist government seizure of firearms on a mass scale at the very least, whereas Canada, some of the other Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, don't have that sort of history of how you came about your independence, right? And so there wasn't a violent revolution to bring you guys into self-governance. It was it didn't go down that way. And so you see countries like Australia and New Zealand pass confiscation efforts with relatively little opposition politically. And then you see Canada doing the same thing. Perhaps there was a bit more in the way of political opposition to it. But I wonder, where do Canadians fall on that scale? Are they more influenced by the American culture or by the sort of Commonwealth culture of where gun confiscation is less taboo, I guess?
There's really a mix, and I mean, there's different gun cultures within Canada. The gun culture that you find, on a reserve might be different than the gun culture you find amongst people living in downtown Toronto. So there's going to be some people certainly who are more of the American mindset, saying, "Listen, I'll never give it up," and we'll see how many of those people flinch in the face of, there's going to be some tactical raids. We're going to see that, and that may change some people's minds, because when you see somebody proned out in their front yard with a, ironically, an AR-15 pointed at the back of their head, that tends to be something people want to avoid. But there's certainly talk in that, vein of of people saying don't comply with this. I don't know what the actual numbers are going to end up looking like. And it'll be interesting, because some of the people affected by this are, as mentioned, Indigenous groups living on reserves, because some of these rifles are very popular on reserves. And there's a history there in terms of rebellions and, other things, where sometimes access to firearms was really what kept the federal government from being as abusive as they wanted. And they wanted to be really abusive, and they were throughout history. But there were points where, so that's going to be a really touchy subject, because, if you've got reserves where lots of people have the Mini 30, for example, which is a popular hunting rifle, and if they're going in saying, "Hey, we want all of these, turn them in," they may find a lot of people going, "No, we've got our own sovereignty, and we're not disarming ourselves in the face of this." So it'll be interesting to see, and I suspect that that's where you may get more pushback, especially with people going, "What do you mean you want to send our people to jail over the hunting rifle they've had for a decade, and they haven't done anything?" That's going to make a lot of people really upset and angry. And I think a lot of the people who are supporting these bans haven't actually thought out who this is going to affect, because a lot of them tend to be sympathetic to Indigenous issues, not realizing that firearm access and firearm rights is one of them. So it's I can't really predict how many people are going to sort of push back in any way, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense. And obviously we see some of the same issues as far as minorities and gun control here in the United States. And some of that history is shared here too. But I think it's interesting. So you do expect that there will actually be police raids on people's homes if they don't comply with this measure. You think that will be a common thing, or is this something you expect as like a show of an example being made of somebody kind of thing?
I mean, one of the things is that they just don't have enough police to raid everybody simultaneously. If they did, I'm sure what they'd love to do is kick down every door of somebody that they don't have a dedicated turn in, 8 o'clock day one. Like as soon as the amnesty expires, just every door a boot to it. But they don't have the resources for that. So what I suspect they're going to do is send increasingly angry letters along with doing some raids, because they, as I said, they can't raid everybody at once, but they can certainly raid somebody every day. And they're probably especially going to sort of target known figures, I suspect, just to make an example. So
have they allocated any sort of resources for enforcement of this ban? I mean, it kind of sounds like they aren't doing much of anything on it. They haven't even come up with the buyback program's basic details yet. So I wonder how forcefully they're going to actually try to put this into place. There's
no indication that they've allocated any sort of special resources to it, but I mean, the police always have sort of a door kicker budget, right? They've a lot of, if you're in a big city, they've probably bought some sort of really expensive, armored personnel carrier, in some cases, former military vehicles and so forth. And they've got guys who are, that's what they do. They're on, the tactical team, and most of those guys don't get enough practice. So they're probably pretty keen on being able to roll out and, hey, we could actually do some practice runs on people who probably aren't too keen on shooting us because they're law-abiding gun owners, they're not meth addicts and so forth. So it's going to be ugly, though, because most of these people are just kind of like family men, family women.
Sure.
So it's a really unfortunate aspect, but I think a lot of the people pushing these don't really think of what happens. And I say a lot of people don't really think about how enforcement happens. That's not true of everybody. There's certainly some people who are really gleeful over the possibility of gun owners having their doors kicked in and possibly hoping that some of us get shot. I've seen comments like that on Twitter, like, I hope the RCMP, kicks down all your doors and shoots you guys in the course of seizures. I'm like, okay, that's what we're dealing with then.
Yeah, certainly those people exist, but I guess I'm just I just wonder how much enforcement there will really be, just because of, and obviously, I don't know that we've seen anything quite like this in Canada before, so it's hard to say exactly, but we have seen, confiscation or mandatory registration efforts done in the United States and Australia and New Zealand. And at least in the United States, what tends to happen is these possession bans get passed, and then there's no real effort to enforce them. And so you see almost no compliance with them. For example, in New Jersey, just recently, they passed a new law that lowered the restriction on how many rounds you could have in a magazine for, an ammunition magazine from 15 to 10. And then they made possession of all the magazines that hold more than 10 rounds illegal. And then they did basically nothing to enforce that rule, and not a single person turned in a magazine to the state police there in the preceding years. That law is in effect right now. It's technically illegal to possess any magazine in New Jersey that holds more than 10 rounds. And generally what you see is these get used as sort of tack-on crimes. Now, it may be different in a situation like you're talking about here with the registry in hand, so police can know, or at least have a good idea of who has the illegal, weapons. Whereas in New Jersey, the magazines weren't registered. And And then you saw a similar thing in New York with the SAFE Act in 2013. They passed a registration requirement that almost nobody complied with. Estimates put it at, the single digits, I believe, as far as how many people, what percentage of gun owners who were affected by the SAFE Act actually complied with it. But of course, you do have more success in places like New Zealand and Australia. New Zealand, the 2019 buyback after the Christchurch massacre, that collected about 56,000 guns, according to news reports. And then in Australia, they had two separate buybacks, mandatory buybacks, confiscation efforts in 2001 and 2003, and those collected a total of about 700,000 firearms. However, even those examples, it's hard to say that they were all that successful, because the compliance rate in New Zealand, some have put that at about 30%. So there's still 70% of the guns affected that weren't turned in or confiscated. And then you had, in Australia, the compliance rate was estimated to be as low as 20%. And they've already basically replaced all the guns that were removed. So they have the same number of guns today as they did during the confiscation, or before the confiscation happened. So, it'll be interesting to see, I think, how the government chooses to try and enforce this, and how successful they actually are at it, given even the places that get touted as big successes in the Western world for gun confiscation didn't actually do that well.
Yeah, and it's I suspect we're going to see a lot of that with respect to the non-registered firearms. There's going to be a lot of people who either just don't realize it or don't feel inclined to. And I think the optics of what they'd have to do in order to seize all of these would include things like, going door to door in reserves, kicking down doors, or insisting on searching. That's unlikely to be popular. And so what's probably going to end up happening is they're going to find these things over time as, if they end up searching somebody's house for other reasons. There's a complaint of domestic violence there or something. So they go in and they seize all the firearms because of that allegation. And then they go, oh, by the way, 8 years ago, we banned this. And so you can't have it. And we're going to add on a charge now. And a fair number of
that sounds much more likely to me.
Yeah. And a fair number of those people are going to be, what do you mean this one was banned? Like, this is my hunting gun. And it's going to have this really long tail of enforcement. So a lot of people sort of think it's going to be that, the amnesty expires and a whole lot of action happens. And there will certainly be some action happening once that expires. But a lot of the enforcement is going to be years later. And, it'll be indigenous guy out hunting, gets stopped by Fish and Wildlife, who goes, okay, yep, you're allowed to be hunting here, but we banned that. And I actually got to take you into the RCMP over this. And you're going to see a lot of conflict over that, because it's already a strong political tension in the sense that we over-incarcerate Indigenous people here in Canada, and lots of people who've managed to avoid the justice system. And I say avoid because, if the police in your area are focusing on you, it can be hard to sort of escape their notice and to not end up with a criminal record over something petty and trivial. But they're going to end up going, what do you mean I'm now going to get a criminal record and a gun ban just because I own the gun I always owned? The one that, might have been passed down in my family. It's there's going to be some real tension and some real difficult conversations around what's happening there in the future.